Okay, so the first thing that I really want to let you know is while the enormous amount of funding available in our region at the moment has certainly been a stimulus to run this webinar is not about any specific type of funding. The reason it's been designed is to help you with your funding applications. So the more questions you can ask, the more valuable it's going to be for you. A tiny little bit about us. So we are Regional Development Australia Mid-North Coast. We're one of 55 regional development organisations throughout Australia. Our region is, as I mentioned, the Coffs Harbour local government area, down to Greater Taree City and out to Lord Howe Island. Now let's get down to business, the funding opportunities. You will no doubt have seen a lot of opportunities in the marketplace at the moment. And if anybody can quickly text, chat, or if you'd like, you can stick your hand up and ask a question using your microphone. I'm wondering if there's any specific funding categories that any of you are looking at the moment. Are there any specific funding categories that any of you are looking at the moment? If you can let me know, that would be great. Thank you. I love hearing that ding. Okay, so that was the same question. Yeah. So whoever asked me where I'm based, I hope I've covered that one off now. Chances are quite a few of you will be looking at the Regional Growth Fund at the moment via the state government. It's a really great time to be based in regional Australia. There's a lot of funding coming our way from both state and federal government. So you should also be able to see at this point, and I hope you can see it, the PowerPoint presentation that's coming to you. So there's a few different portals where you can look for various funding opportunities. One is on our site, rdamnc.org.au. We have a funding portal. And there's several other state and federal government funding sources that you can look at as well. I have your email addresses and I will email those to you after the webinar's finished. Now, the first question I always ask people when they're considering putting together a funding application is, how much do you need? Exactly how much do you need to conduct the project that you're running on at the moment? Now, I don't have a lot of background of those of you who are online. As you know, at the moment, there's funding in the marketplace for business development and funding available in the marketplace for not-for-profit and community-type pursuits. I'm very interested if those of you who are listening today are looking for funding to stimulate your business, or if perhaps you are a not-for-profit organisation seeking money to do something for a community. If you could let me know which one you fall into, that would be very helpful. So I'm just going to check the chat and see. So it looks like we're not using the chat at the moment, which is okay. Thank you, guys. So Great Lakes Women's Shelter, you're really interested in capital funding for a purpose-built shelter. This is a 4-year plan, not ready for 2017, maybe 2018. Okay, great. That's great information to help me. And as you'll know right now, a lot of the funding that's available in the marketplace is very much geared towards infrastructure. So that's, I guess, an extra context we can give to the webinar today as well. So just coming back to this, how much is it that you need? So sometimes when I work with funding with bodies who are looking for grants and funding, and I probably should explain that I have worked as a professional grant writer for many, many years, entities will say to me, we'll just get as much money as we possibly can. And while that might seem a little bit obvious, it's not always the best funding strategy to go ahead with. Having a very clear idea of your numbers is very important. And with the applications that are in the marketplace at the moment, it's even more important. Get your quotes together. Understand how much it's going to cost for you to run your project or to build whatever it is that you're going to build. You need to have the numbers in place. It's very important. So understand how much money you'll need. So I've just received another message that says from Julie. Thanks, Julie. Short term, we're really interested in non-capital funding. This can keep till Later in the session. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Julie. And I'm happy to cover both as we go. So what I would determine as soft infrastructure is something that I'm very interested in as well. I know in our region of the Mid-North Coast, we need those bits, we need funding for those things that link together services for our community as well, so that it may not be a big thing, hard infrastructure that we're always needing. It could be the more soft stuff as well. So I'm happy to cover that too. So understand how much you need. That's really important. And the next one is also really obvious. And why? What is it? What's your case? What's the business case? What's the argument? What's the community support? Why do you need funding for this thing? Why don't you generate revenue to pay for it? Why is it that the public needs to pay for this? So your why is something that's really important. Now, these two questions are the two most important things to start with when you're thinking about funding. And I'll tell you what, you may already know this, I'm sure you do. A lot of funding applications are created because somebody stumbled upon a grant category and decided that they'll try their luck and chuck an application in. That can be very dangerous for any type of business, whether it's a not-for-profit business, a community group, or a private sector business, because it can create mission drift. Funding applications have deliverables that you must achieve in order to get the payment. If you're applying for something on a whim because you saw it on the internet, chances are it will have effects on your business that could potentially damage it. So maybe you've seen all of these excellent infrastructure grants out there and decided, oh yeah, maybe we could add a little bit to the building. But what you could find is that could actually derail your entire business plan because it's not something that you'd expected. It was some money that you decided to have a grab at. Now, look, I'm not saying don't go for it, but I am saying be very careful that your why, the reason that you're applying for this particular type of funding is because it's linked to the core purpose of what you're doing and it's something that you need. Because I'm not even going to pretend that any of these grants don't come encumbered with a certain amount of paperwork that are going to eat up your staff time, because that's what they do. So the next slide that you should be able to see now, I'm hoping, is about your strategic plan. So if you're listening on the phone, obviously you can't see it. Carrying on from what I was saying before, you really need to make sure that what you're applying for in your funding fits with your organisational strategic plan. Where is your organisation going in the next 2 months, 2 years, 20 years? Does what you're applying for right now fit really neatly within this strategic plan, or does it have the opportunity to, or the potential to derail your business and where it's going? If you don't have a strategic plan in place, perhaps now's a good time to be thinking about that. And look, these things don't have to cost mega bucks. There's lots of very simple templates that you can use to do things in-house, or perhaps you could work with a partner of some type to develop a strategic plan, and you might do some of the legwork to save you some of the costs as well. Right. One last slide before we get into the nitty-gritty of writing the funding application. Now, this is particularly for the not-for-profit people that are listening. Just a few different ideas to get you thinking about different ways that you can raise money that may not necessarily involve a government grant. So different ways include fundraising. So maybe your fundraising is having a ball, maybe it's a lock the boss type competition, something like that. Philanthropy and donations. So this is where you're essentially getting corporate investors to invest into your business model. And social impact is something that you'll hear more and more these days. So people are really wanting to understand if they're to make a sponsorship or a philanthropic investment in your organisation, how will you be changing the community as a result? How will you be working with the target groups, and what is it that you'll be achieving? Sponsorship, similarly. So sponsors are buying into some type of package where you're delivering something in exchange for the money or the in-kind sponsorship that they're contributing. Now, I'm curious, has anybody had any experience with crowdfunding? Crowdfunding is, I just find it such a fascinating thing in this day and age. Crowdfunding spans both the not-for-profit sector and commercial business enterprise. Many of you will have heard of flow hives, which generated an enormous amount of funding for their startup at that time business. Has anybody had anything to do with crowdfunding? So there's so many different platforms that you can crowdfund these days. It's something that's most definitely worth exploring if you are one of the people listening that is in the not-for-profit space. So investment is also something that may be of interest. Many years ago, I was managing a completely different not-for-profit organisation. That organisation had essentially it was a commercial project that was a component of it. So that commercial project was a textiles manufacturing business. Now, there was absolutely no legal reason why that business could not set up to have investors as part of it. So those investors could be a component. Hey, someone's using the chat. That's exciting. John, thank you. Know of it, but I have not utilised crowdfunding. Yeah, thank you, John, for letting me know that. That's great. And by the way, I interviewed a man called Tom Dawkins some time ago, and Tom founded one of the really great crowdfunding platforms called Start Some Good. If you would like to get hold of that interview, I'm very happy to share it with you. So just send me an email and let me know you'd like it. ceo@rdamnc.org.au. So investment might be something that you're looking at. Commercial loans, now the entity CIFA was set up to be able to facilitate different types of loans, same with Many Rivers micro enterprise. So if you are not a not-for-profit or a micro business, you may be able to access both of those sources for commercial loans. And they'll look at things that normal lending institutions won't look at because they understand the not-for-profit and micro business environments and that they can be a little bit different. So self-generated revenue, back to the social enterprise conversation, is there a way that if you are not-for-profit, is there a way that you can generate revenue so that you can contribute to your core operational costs? Now, that is demonstrated in so many different ways by not-for-profit organisations, ranging from some not-for-profits might own buildings, for example, and they could be investment properties, or they could be raising money through the rental of those. Some not-for-profits might have merchandise that they're selling. So all self-generated revenue in different types. Now I'm just going to give you an aside as well. If you would like to hear a webinar specifically about social enterprise, I'd be very happy to deliver that for you as well, but you're going to have to tell me. Okay, let's get on to the funding. Here is the most important thing that any type of business requires before they even think about writing funding. So I suggest that you get cracking on this funding kit today when you hang up from the webinar. This is what you need. So in your kit, you're going to need several different things. Number one is the history of your organisation. So when was it founded? Who founded it? Who's been part of it? What are the landmark occasions that your business has had? What have you achieved? What are your core achievements? How many people do you employ? Are they from diverse backgrounds? How do you support marginalised communities? Now, even if you are a commercial business, that is still something in the funding environment that is good to address, because in the Mid-North Coast, we do have pockets of very high disadvantage. Some of the funding applications you will come across will ask how you contribute in a social context as well. So if you can have this information at your fingertips, that means that you'll be able to point your funding aspirations in several different directions. Happy to explain that sentence in more detail if you'd like me to. So what's the history of your organisation? And get, wherever you can, examples of videos, pictures, so that you can really be backing this up. What the history of the organisation does for somebody reading a funding application is it shows them you've been about, you've got runs on the board, and the community has supported your organisation over a period of time. Because I really want you to remember that no matter what type of funding application you're putting in, human beings are reading and assessing them. Funding is more competitive now than it has ever been. and you need to have a compelling argument as to why this department or philanthropist or whoever it is going to part with their cash and give it to you. Why should they trust you? Now, your history is very good evidence of why you are and should be trusted. So local statistics is the next thing. Now, I'm just going to change screens for a second so that you can have a look at, on the Regional Development Australia website, so rdamnc.org.au. So we have access to a platform called RemPlan. Now, within RemPlan, we give our public, and now anybody can access this information to data. Now, this data is generated from the census, and I'm just going to click on it so you can see it. Now, hopefully you can see it. Hang on, it's telling me my screen is paused. We don't want that. Okay. You may be able to see this, or we may be having a bit of a glitch with the screen at the moment. Let me just double check. Okay, sorry, bear with me for just a sec. Okay, so you may not be able to see the screen at the moment. I'm going to give you audio commentary on this. So on our website, you will have access to the RemPlan data. So when you go to rdamnc.org.au, if you click on the tab Resources, you will then see, as you scroll down, Community Data App and Economy Data App. Now, that is information that is useful for you in your funding application. So you can pull down information from there and you can use it. Further data analysis that you will need for some certain applications is certainly something that RDA can do, and we have a sliding scale model, I guess, which dictates whether it is a fee for service or not. So just contact us if that's something that you're in need of. Okay, sorry, just having a little glitch with the software here. It's just obviously you can't see the screen. If you've run a Zoom webinar before, you'll know that I'm actually doing 4 things at once, which isn't always the brightest idea. So anyway, right now you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation again. Right, so local statistics proving the need. Access the RemPlan data from the RDA website. You know you can contact us if you need further insight into the data, and there are also many people throughout the region who can assist you with that as a consultancy basis or research basis as well. You'll need to have local case studies, so you'll need to be able to prove that there is a desire for what it is that you're offering to the marketplace. Will people utilise it? Is it going to make a difference? You need to prove this, because you say that it's a good thing, unfortunately isn't enough. So how do you do that? You can do it in numerous ways. Number one is by going out and interviewing some of your stakeholders. So if you're a not-for-profit, maybe interview a couple of clients. If you're a business, same thing, interview a couple of clients. Would people utilise this thing that is different? Yeah, and a not-for-profit, would people use the service? Get the case studies together so you've got them on hand. So remember, what you're doing as you're building this kit is you're building evidence for when your organisation wants to apply for a grant. If anybody that is listening right now has ever applied for a grant before, I bet there was something that you had to source approximately 25 minutes before the grant closed, and there was a mad rush right at the end to be able to get it. Maybe it was a letter of support, maybe it was a certificate of incorporation. I've done that, and I know how horrible it feels, which is why I developed this idea of a kit. So the idea of the kit is that you just put a little note in your diary. Yes, whoever sent that, thank you. Put a note in your diary once you've got your kit together. On a monthly basis, just go back and have a little check that it's all current and up to date, and that is just going to save you so many headaches. And ultimately, no matter what kind of business it is, it's going to save you money when you engage a grant writer as well, because they won't have to go and find all that stuff. I can't even begin to tell you how excited I would be as a grant writer if somebody gave me a package with all of these things in it. It would be excellent. Okay, so you've got your local case studies proving the desire for this particular project. Now, your partners is the next thing, and as it says on the slide, if you can see it, I haven't finished speaking about that yet. Please don't go and ask people to be a partner in your funding application the day before or the day of the due date. It's really annoying. So get your partners lined up well and truly in advance. And this comes back to your strategic plan as well. So your strategic plan would tell you you're going to do A, B, C into the future. Work out who the partners you need are when you're doing the planning process, not when the grant comes up. And I am going to speak a little bit more about developing partnerships in a second. So you'll need pictures and also video, links to your website, links to your social media. These people need to know that you have a really good digital footprint as well. So you're needing to be able to prove that. If you have a blog or a blog component of your website, make sure that you're blogging, at least on a fortnightly basis, even if it's just regurgitating something. If somebody's assessing your funding application and they decide to go to your website and you haven't posted up a blog since November last year, it might be a faint sounding warning bell, but it's certainly going to ring a warning bell. So make sure everything's up to date. Now, this is really important. Have your incorporation documents and your audited statements ready at hand, ready to send, ready to go. You are going to need to submit them more often than not with funding applications, so make sure you've got them ready. Now, permission's also something you'll need, and if you're applying for one of the infrastructure grants, you'll note that quite a lot of them are requesting that you have your DA approval prior to putting the funding application in. Now, be aware of that, and this is where you really want to go in and read the criteria in great depth, because you don't want to get to the end of a long funding process to realise that you're not actually eligible to participate in the first place. So make sure you've got all of the permission in place. If you don't know what PBI DGR is, so PBI is Public Benevolent Institution. DGR means deductible gift recipient. So these are in line with the tax status that enables you to be a charity, if that's in fact what you're trading as. So some funding categories, particularly when they're coming from philanthropic sources, will only accept applications from entities that have PBI status or DGR status, or are registered with a charity, with the Australian Charities Not-for-Profit Commission. And this is because it gives them tax deductions, basically. So they're the only entities that they will be dealing with in that context. And that's really important for you to know. Again, come back to the point, make sure you've read the application in great depth. Gary, you've just let me know you're not quite sure what crowdfunding is. As I mentioned, if you can, I've got your email address from when you registered, so I'll send you a link to the Tom Dawkins interview that I mentioned. I really think that that's an excellent explanation of it. My elevator pitch about crowdfunding is it's a way of generating funding which is facilitated by the internet. Now, if you can excuse me just a second, I'm just going to cough. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. There's that lurky again. Now, somebody else has said the kit also needs data on volunteer support and possible contributions in kind. Yeah, that's a really great point. Thank you. And did I have another message, which was more on the self-generated revenue webinar? Very happy to do that. I'll let you know of the date via your email. And That's right, possible in contributions. So you will see a lot of the funding applications that you come across when you get to the budget stage. It'll ask you questions like, have you ever applied for funding for this project through other categories? Now that can be a really quite a trick question, because sometimes you'll have a funding application in with another entity, but you're not sure if it's been successful or not. So, and something that I've always found a bit weird, I must admit, is that, so you've got this funding application sitting out there in limbo land somewhere. You're writing another application, but there's nowhere for you to write in the box, well, we don't know if we've got it or not. So I guess that's really up to you to decide, well, you don't have it, you don't know if you've got it. Do you write it there, or I don't know. I think you have to use your own discretion in those cases, because you don't want to be disadvantaged for having applied for funding that you don't know if you've got it or not. Now, understanding volunteer contributions is very important as well, and I most certainly will add that to the kit. Thank you, that's great. The other thing, particularly if any type of business really, is understanding your employment and your staff levels as well. So how many people do you currently employ? How many people are you likely to employ once this project changes? A lot of the funding at the moment is geared around job creation. So you need to understand how many jobs are going to be created as a result of this funding application being successful. Okay, now the next bit after permission is in your, I guess this may not necessarily be in the kit because it will change on a grant-to-grant basis. So let's just talk about quotes and we'll come back to criteria. So if you're having something built, if you're developing infrastructure, have you got your quotations in place already? Now, I highly recommend that you would get 3 quotations so that you can show that you've gone through a due process. You may also require to go out to tender. It depends on, I guess, the levels of investment that you're looking at. But you just don't want to go in to a funding application with a loose idea about how much something's going to cost. The more background data, hard information you can provide, the more likely you are to be successful. Okay, so let's talk about the funding criteria, when to and when not to. So with the funding criteria, any type of application you're going to apply for will have a certain amount of criteria that you will need to address. I cannot begin to express how irritating it is to read a funding application, and I've assessed numerous categories where the people do not read the question. So if you find that it's difficult to understand a question that you're being asked, all you need to do is clarify it with, there will always be a hotline or somebody that you can phone about the funding. Phone them and say, I'm just not sure what this specifically means. So there's nobody sitting on the end of those helplines with a red pen getting ready to write down the name of your organisation because you asked too many questions. Make sure you're absolutely clear about what the question means and answer the question to the best of your ability. Now, a lot of funding applications these days have word limits or character limits within them. So you need to be writing for impact as you address the criteria. Ways to do that, I think a really good way to do that is to know your data and to write the statistics. And also come back to the point where you're remembering that it's a human being that's reading this funding application. So what is your highest impact sentence? If you don't know what it is, test it out at a barbecue or on a few people around you. You may have one sentence that says, let's say for example, you're trying to fund a health program to work with childhood obesity. Your opening sentence could be a high impact statement such as 45% of kids, and I'm just making this up by the way, 45% of kids in our community are currently facing future health issues because of obesity. That could be a way of incorporating numbers. Whereas if you're using a sentence that is, I guess, a little bit more qualitative and introducing it by saying obesity decreases the quality of life, blah, blah, blah. If you're in a limited character count, you really want to get your high impact statement across as quickly as possible. What's the most shocking thing you can say? What's the most exciting thing you can say? What's the most engaging thing you can say? Your funding body is not going to need a definition of obesity in the example I just gave. They need to know what impact your project is going to create. So that's, I guess, the funding kit in a nutshell, and I will go back and add those things as well, which is fabulous. The next thing that we want to have a think about is forming a concept. So let's say you've got your funding kit in place, you have a strategic plan. Now, you know that there's a couple of gaps that could be easily solved with funding. What you want to do now is a grant has become available. Now you need to match the availability of the grant to the gaps that you have in your business. So this is where you start to form a concept. Now, some people are really great at doing this themselves. Personally, I find it's better to talk it through with a team of people. And again, this is where the partnerships can be so valuable. So you've identified this gap in your business, and the funding application is just a little bit slightly to the side. Now, I'll give you an example of what I'm thinking about here. So I mentioned before there was a textile business that I helped to establish as a social enterprise. I knew that it was mostly women that were interested in participating in this enterprise. So I saw a health grant come out. Now, health, textiles, how are they related? Not really. Some may argue that. What I decided was that in order to engage the women that would be part of the textile project, the textile enterprise, I need to have some catch to bring them in. So what I decided was we had the machines already there. I just needed to attract the women into the room to be participating in this business. So healthy eating was something that we targeted with part of this health grant. So the health grant was paying for a healthy eating program, which could look at catering and bringing in certain contacts to be able to work alongside these women. But simultaneously, part of that grant could apply for project materials. Well, guess what we could buy? Fabric. Part of it could pay for a facilitator. So guess what we used it for? A project officer. So even though the grant seemed to be completely non-aligned to what it was we were trying to do with establishing the business, we could bring the two concepts together so that we could use the health-oriented funding to also provide seed funding for this textile business. And the paperwork wasn't too onerous because we hadn't drifted away from the core purpose of what we were trying to do. We were still bringing women together in a healthy environment where they could discuss health issues, wellbeing issues, etc. It just so happened that at the same time they were doing that, they were sewing. So that was one of the building blocks that enabled this business to be established. And interestingly, well, for me anyway, there was also a sport grant that contributed to the establishment of that business. So there were different building blocks that we used, but because we'd spent the time to form the concept, and the concept was all based around these largely women coming together to sew, to create an enterprise in textiles, we could then just look at, okay, what issues may these women in the community be facing? Oh, maybe there's health issues, maybe there's wellbeing issues. Okay, we can look at funding in that realm as well. I hope I've explained that in a way that makes sense. When you're applying for any type of grant, if you've got the concept together, if you understand the target market that you're serving, no matter what kind of business entity you have, you can then have a few different options as to how you're applying for the funding and what area it's coming from. Okay, let's have a think about partnerships for a little bit. So if you can let me know on the text or however you're communicating with me, I'd like you to estimate how many partners your business entity, and for not-for-profit people, I'm calling you a business entity at this point, estimate how many partners your entity has. I'd be really curious to know. Estimate how many partners your entity has. So business partnerships, if you've been writing grants for a long time, you'll notice that, thousands. I love that. Thank you. That's great to know. Thanks, Julie. If you've been writing grants for a long time, you'll have noticed that in recent years, government has more and more focus on the partners that are involved in this. And I think that's a fabulous thing, because partnerships are really essential to be creating really strong community projects. So when you're creating your, when you're writing your funding application, sorry, what I want you to really understand is what bit is your business. So unfortunately, in recent years, I've seen funding applications becoming much more competitive, and this is particularly in the not-for-profit space. So we will see on some occasions smaller non-government organisations in particular might apply for funding that isn't traditionally their business. It's not their part of the business. So from disability providers applying for health or different types of grants to deliver projects that aren't part of their core business. So something about effective partnerships is really understanding what part of it is your business and not poaching work from the other entities that you're partners with. It's a pretty good way to very quickly disrupt partnership models. But how do you go about engaging partners in the first place? I honestly believe it's as simple and as difficult as normal day-to-day relationship development. So it's having a coffee with people every now and then. It's sharing information when you can. Some entities even share staff and have joined staff pools, which is absolutely fabulous. When we talk about the region of the Mid-North Coast, which we do represent, we are too small here to not have healthy business partnerships. If you've ever been part of a sour business partnership, you'll know how damaging that can be to business. And it really just eats up your time, which is a waste. Oh, Gary, thank you. So you have at least 40 partners that are part of your business model, which is great. Partnerships are a webinar within itself, which I would as well be happy to deliver if there's an interest for it. But right now, I don't want to tell you how to suck eggs, but I do want to tell you engaging partners beyond ticking the boxes really relies on ensuring that your partners are engaged in what your business model looks like today and what you hope it's going to look like in 10 years' time, 5 years' time, 6 months' time, so that your partners know how you can work together and that you're not going to poach their business, you're going to actually complement it. There are so many opportunities across our region that I see for entities working in collaboration together, and these really brilliant cross-sector collaborations as well. So commercial enterprises partnering with not-for-profits, partnering with government, so that we can have what I call relationships that are truly fourth sector relationships and serve our community well, increase the capacity for employment across the region, and also offer people the services that they want. So great models to be looking at. Please, I've said this already, please don't ask your partners for letters of support or to come on board the day before the grant is due, because it just leaves a sour taste in people's mouths. Yeah, it really does. So be prepared. And if you know that you're putting in a funding application, the first thing that I usually do is I write a one-page synopsis about it, or maybe even a 3-paragraph synopsis about it. I send it to all of the partners I'd like to be part of it. The synopsis will also include a customised component which says, I'd like to invite your service to do XYZ as part of this. Are you interested or not? I will also be requiring a letter of support. Is this okay? And flick it out as soon as we decide to apply for that grant. That is it's just a really respectful way of treating your partners and engaging them. Now, in terms of writing the actual application, aside of making sure that you have a really good read through the terms, now I'll be a little bit honest here. I can find sometimes that reading the terms and conditions or the criteria of the funding can be a little bit tedious. So quite often I have the skeleton of an application knocked up simultaneously to reading the terms as I get to that question at the time. What I have learned to do in recent years is just to make sure I have at least a really good scan of the documents that go along with the funding, just to really make sure that I'm eligible. And if I'm running extra short on time, I'll go straight to the eligibility criteria and read through that and make sure that I'm eligible for it. If you're at a commercial business and this is the first time that you're putting together a funding application, that in itself is a really important thing to do, very important to know. Now, writing the application, I can't stress to you how important I can't stress enough how important it is that you are very across what is current in media as you're writing a funding application. So what I generally like to do is go into essentially a bit of a lockdown, which obviously depending on how big the application is will depend on how long, but generally between 2 days to 5 days, 5 days for a really large application. And during that time, I'll be following what's trending on social media. I'll be buying newspapers and reading what is current in them. I will be listening to various radio stations, some of which I'm too embarrassed to tell you I've listened to. And I will be listening for what's current, what are people talking about, what are the buzzwords, and all of those things will feature somewhere within the funding application in however I can draw the context in. The reason I'm doing that is because I know that the people that are assessing these applications are also looking at what's current. So they're looking at what are people currently talking about, what is aligned to the policies and the broader conversations of the community, and is this application that I'm seeing in front of me right now, is it within the context of how, what society is requiring and speaking about at the moment? So immerse yourself as much as you can in media as you're writing the funding applications. And if you can, actually find a way to go into some type of lockdown where you're not bothered, and turn your email off, because that's one of the biggest distractions. Turn your phone on to silent and let people around you, and this includes your family at home, because writing funding applications can be a very stressful time. And you just need to be able to look after yourself and look after your space at the same time to make sure you can have adequate ability to knock this thing out and be successful in the application. Again, I'll stress, make sure you're addressing the criteria, very important. If you don't understand the criteria, phone that hotline and make sure that you're asking questions about it. Now, lobbying support is the next slide that I have here. And please don't think that once you've handed your funding application in, it's really that's it, that's the end of it. You need to make sure that your local representatives are aware of the funding application. Now, they may have provided you with a letter of support, but it's also, I think, a polite and a wise thing to do to phone them to let them know your progress, even if you're speaking with a ministerial advisor or one of your MP's advisors, or even somebody within your local council that's involved in grant writing. Make sure that they know and keep them up to date with what it is that you're doing. Now, keeping them up to date doesn't mean just popping into their office every now and then and making sure that they're up to date, because that can be annoying. What it means is maybe just sending them a polite email every now and then and letting them know how you're progressing as well. Also, coming back to what was in your kit, looking at your local case studies and ensuring that you're telling them these really good news stories. And this is where the media can be a great support to you as well. So get good at writing media releases, get a great photo stock. Now, none of this needs to cost any money, actually, or it can be costing a limited amount of money. But keep your media engaged with what it is that you're doing as well, because that will also help with your lobbying. Just a quick word on delivery. Now, I've got a really tough looking guy on this slide because I've seen grants that have been awarded and not delivered, and don't expect to get another one if that's going to be, and I know that none of you listening today would do that, but it does happen. Sometimes grants don't get delivered, and sometimes for very good reasons. If you're running into difficulties in delivering a grant, keep your funding body informed at every single step of the way. It's so important to do that. I have delivered grants before where we've actually stumbled upon opportunities that can mean that we get even broader outcomes. So I've called the funding body straight away and said, hey, do you mind if we do this instead of that? Is that okay? Sure, that was fine, because I let them know up front. I didn't decide just to do it. And we had that ongoing dialogue throughout the whole thing. So make sure that you are delivering. And impact measurement and talking it up. So as you're doing it, again, make sure you've got the media engaged and make sure you know what it is that you're measuring as well, so that you can report that back to your funding body. Sometimes what your funding body asks you to measure will not actually be indicative of any type of change you've created. I guess an example of that I'd like to give you is I was at one point asked to measure how many people turned up for a healthy parenting course. And the impact that I was looking for was, I was really looking for changes in the aspirations of parents in the community. Now, yeah, turning up to the parenting course could be one type of indication, but it certainly wasn't enough to tell me that this change was happening. So I needed to look at different indicators so that not only could I tell my funding body what they needed to know, but I could also run something that told me what I needed to know, that the changes were happening. Now, that doesn't need to increase your paperwork load to ridiculous levels, but what it can do is show you that you are actually having an impact. Now, this message is particularly for the community-oriented people. If you are part of a not-for-profit sector, be it as an employee, a community member, a board member, or a volunteer, you'll most likely be doing that because you're somebody that cares about your community. Now, so many of us work in not-for-profit organisations and see year after year after year the same things presenting again and again. If you have some kind of way of measuring what you're doing in community so you can see even the small steps of success, it's going to make you more motivated. It gives you more evidence to show your funding bodies that you're doing your job in the community, and you can also feed it back to your clients. Not only that, it gives you a body of evidence to show you what does work so that you can keep doing that and improving upon that into the future. Finally, it never hurts to say thank you. So, yes, you send your funding body a report. That's great. So, is it really that difficult to just add a thank you message to it? I found a funding application I wrote numerous years ago, which was successful for $250,000 for the federal binge drinking strategy. When I sent that in, I collected from the particular community that had applied for it. I found a series of postcards, which I can guarantee you will find in your local news agencies as well. And on those postcards, it said things like, I got drunk in X community, or I drank too much beer in X community. And I actually sent those with the funding application. So that just gave that funding application a slightly different edge. On the back of it, I just used it as like a with comp slip, and I wrote on the back of the card, as you can see, the culture of drinking is very much embedded in this community. Here's an example on the postcard. Now, that wasn't asked for in the funding criteria, but it was something that I could just get away with because it was just seen as a with comp slip that I'd added in. And remember, humans read your funding applications. So the thank you, I believe, is really important because it's not only people in your community and other businesses you're building relationships with, it's also the government people or the philanthropic people that are assessing these applications. So your reporting, of course, is very important as well. So it's important you're getting that in on time. Happy to answer any questions. If you can see the slide, our contact details are on there. If you can't, I'll just read them to you quickly. So our web address is rdamnc.org.au. Our email is admin@rdamnc.org.au. And our phone number is 5525 1500. Now, as mentioned at the beginning, my name's Kerry Grace. I'm the CEO of Regional Development. The best way to connect with me to ask questions is via email, and I don't mind if you email me directly. Same URL, but my direct email is ceo@. Really happy to do that. And delivering webinars is something that I love to do and something we'll be doing a lot more of. So it looks like we've already got called to deliver another one. We'll also be delivering some webinars soon, which will introduce you to key government agencies that will also help you with your grants and funding and many, many other things. And I'd also like to let you know that we'll be having an event on the 8th of November in the community of Barraville. That event's called Ignite Mid-North Coast, and we'll be releasing the keynote speaker's name very soon, so that'll be on our Facebook page. Any more information you'd like about it, happy to share. Now, that pretty much brings us to the end of the webinar. As mentioned, I'm going to hang around for a little bit longer just to answer any questions. I'm going to stop the recording right now.